The room smelled like money and fresh paint. Someone had arranged white orchids on every table, and the centerpieces were taller than I was, which I thought was a bit much for a Tuesday evening in February. But that was the Urban Development Institute Awards for you, the kind of event where developers flew in from Calgary and Vancouver just to shake hands and have their photos taken with people they'd been emailing for years. My husband was at the front of the room. Table 4. I was at table 19. I checked my place card 3 times when I arrived, thinking there had been some kind of mistake. There wasn't. Table 19 was near the exit, beside the service corridor, close enough that I could hear the kitchen staff talking through the wall. My husband's assistant had sent the seating arrangements 2 weeks ago, and apparently she had put me there. My husband had apparently not noticed or had not said anything, which I was beginning to understand was the same thing. I watched him from across the room. He was laughing at something the man beside him said, his shoulders relaxed, his hand resting easily on the back of his chair. He looked comfortable. He looked like someone who had built something from nothing and deserved every inch of the spotlight he was about to stand in. The problem was that I had built it with him. And he had stopped mentioning that part about 4 years ago. The MC tapped the microphone and the room settled. My husband straightened his jacket. The award was for large-scale residential innovation, the category his company, Alderton Development Group, had dominated in Ontario for the past 6 years. The project in question was the Lakeview Commons development in Mississauga, a mixed-use community on the waterfront that had been featured in Azure magazine and shortlisted for a Governor-General's Medal in Architecture. 412 units, 3 commercial towers, a community center, a sustainable water management system that I had designed from scratch over the course of 2 years, working from our dining room table while our daughter finished homework across from me. My name was not in the program. The award went to Alderton Development Group, represented by my husband. He walked to the stage to applause that filled the room, and I clapped along with everyone else because my hands knew what to do even when the rest of me felt very far away. He thanked his investors. He thanked the city planning team. He thanked the engineers at Morrison Consulting and the architects at the firm he'd brought on in the final year for finishing work. He thanked his creative director, Vanessa Lau, who rose from her seat at table 4 with her hand pressed to her chest like she might cry. He did not thank me. He said something about vision and community and the importance of building spaces that bring people together. The applause came back and he smiled into it and stepped off the stage, and the room moved on. The woman sitting next to me, a structural engineer I'd met at a conference in Ottawa a few years back, put her hand briefly on my arm. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I needed air. The lobby of the Fairmont Royal York was quieter, all marble and warm light, the kind of hotel that had been impressive for 100 years and planned to remain that way. I stood near a window and looked out at Front Street and tried to figure out exactly how I felt. Cold, mostly. Not upset in the way I might have expected. Just cold and very clear-headed, the way you get sometimes when something that has been building for a long time finally arrives. I heard heels on the marble and turned. The woman walking toward me was in her early 30s, in a deep green dress that had probably cost more than my first car. She had the kind of effortless confidence that comes from being told your whole life that you belong in every room you enter. I recognized her. Vanessa Lau, creative director. The woman my husband had hired 3 years ago and described to me as a game changer. She smiled when she saw me. It was a warm smile. Practiced. "You must be Claire," she said. "I've been hoping we'd have a chance to talk tonight." "Have you?" I said. "Marcus speaks so highly of you." That was the first thing she said that I didn't believe. I could tell because her eyes stayed perfectly still when she said it, no movement, no warmth behind the words. "He says you were quite the engineer back in the day." Before she gestured vaguely, a small wave of her hand, "before everything. The family, the kids, all of it. He says you were really talented." "Where?" "Back in the day. Before everything. I filed the mechanical and structural design applications for Lakeview Commons 14 months ago," I said. "I'm still quite active." Something shifted in her face. Just slightly. "Oh, of course," she said smoothly. "I just meant, it must be different now. Balancing everything. Marcus works such long hours and I imagine it's a lot, managing things at home." She tilted her head. "It's so wonderful that he has that support. A lot of men in his position don't." She said it kindly. That was the worst part. She said it like she was complimenting me, Like being thanked for managing things at home was the reasonable expectation for someone in my position, and she was simply acknowledging reality. The waterfront drainage system, I said. The one that's been cited in 3 separate engineering publications this year. I designed that. The community center's passive energy structure. The load-bearing calculations for the commercial towers. The integrated stormwater management approach that saved the project $4.2 million and got the development its LEED Platinum certification. That was my work. Vanessa looked at me for a moment. How sweet, she said. And then, as though she hadn't just said that, I should get back. Marcus will be looking for me. We have a dinner with the investors after this. She paused, her hand on my arm for just a moment. It was really lovely to meet you, Claire. You must be so proud of everything he's built. She walked away. I stood in the lobby of the Fairmont Royal York and I thought about 17 years. I thought about Claire Bennett, structural engineer, the person I'd been before I became Mrs. Alderton, the person I had quietly kept being on the side, in the converted study off our garage in Oakville, while my husband grew a company on the foundation of work I had done and continued doing and was apparently no longer visible enough to credit. I took out my phone. The holding company had been my sister's idea. She was a family law attorney in Waterloo. And when I told her, 8 years ago, that I was thinking about doing the design work for my husband's growing development business, she had sat me down at her kitchen table and said, very plainly, that I needed to protect myself. You are a professional, she'd said. Your work has value. Structure it like it has value. Bennett IP Holdings Incorporated. I'd incorporated it in Ontario with a small grant from a professional development fund I'd applied for through the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. I'd registered every design, every structural innovation, every system and process and proprietary methodology under that company. My husband had signed a licensing agreement. He'd been in a hurry that day, flying out to Calgary for a meeting. And he'd signed it the way he signed most things I brought him, trusting that I was handling the details, which I was, just not exclusively for his benefit. I scrolled to a name in my contacts. David Park. My former colleague at the engineering firm where I'd worked before my daughter was born. Now a senior partner at a firm that specialized in IP and technology law. He picked up on the third ring. Claire? It's late. Everything okay? I have a hypothetical, I said. A pause. Okay. If a holding company had licensed proprietary structural and mechanical design IP to a development firm under a license agreement that included a termination clause, how complicated would it be to invoke that clause? Silence. Claire, hypothetically, what does the termination clause say? Licensor may terminate with 60 days written notice under any of the following conditions. I quoted it from memory because I had written it. Material breach, change in business circumstances, or determination that continuation is no longer in the licensor's best interest. Another silence. Longer. That last condition, David said carefully, is unusually broad. I know. I drafted it, Christ. I heard him exhale. Are we talking about Alderton Group? I didn't answer. Claire, that company is in the middle of 2 active projects and has financing lined up for a third. If the IP licensing collapsed, I know what it would do. This would be, we're talking about a significant event. Investors, lenders, municipal partners. The fallout would be. I know, I said. I'll call you this week. I ended the call and stood very still for a moment. Through the lobby windows, Front Street was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get in February in Toronto when it's too cold for anyone sensible to be outside. A streetcar moved past, lit up orange and warm. I went back into the gala. My husband was at a table with 3 men I recognized from the Harborview Capital Group, the private equity fund that had backed Alderton's last 2 projects. Vanessa was beside him, laughing at something someone had said. When he saw me approach, his expression did something complicated: surprise, then a careful version of welcome. There you are. He put his arm around my shoulders. Gentlemen, this is Claire, my wife. Your husband just gave a hell of a speech, one of the investors said. He did, I said. Claire's been a tremendous support, my husband said. She keeps everything running at home while I'm out here in the trenches. I honestly couldn't do it without her, he said it warmly. He meant it, in the way that people mean things they say without thinking about what they actually mean. Claire's an engineer, Vanessa said pleasantly, from across the table. She has a real passion for design. It's wonderful to have that kind of creative outlet. One of the investors nodded politely. My husband's hand tightened on my shoulder, just slightly. What kind of engineering? One of the other men asked, with genuine curiosity. Structural and mechanical, I said. Primarily large-scale residential and mixed-use. The waterfront stormwater management system on the Lakeview Commons project, the one that got the LEED Platinum, that was mine. There was a short silence. That system is genuinely impressive, one of the investors said. We had questions about it in due diligence. The integration with the district energy setup was something I'd never seen done quite that way. It's based on a proprietary methodology I developed, I said. It's registered under my holding company. I watched my husband's jaw tighten. Your holding company? The same investor asked. Bennett IP Holdings. All the structural and mechanical IP that underlies Alderton's design portfolio is licensed through my company. The silence at the table was a different kind of silence now. My husband laughed, the easy laugh he used when something had surprised him and he needed a moment. Claire loves the technical details, he said. Honey, these guys don't want to talk shop all night. I'd actually love to hear more, the first investor said. He was looking at me with a different quality of attention now. We stayed for another hour. I answered every question anyone asked. My husband's smile got tighter and tighter. Vanessa stopped smiling around the 40-minute mark. We drove home in almost complete silence. The 401 was clear, the way it only is in the dead of winter after 10 at night. He drove fast, hands hard on the steering wheel. What was that? He said finally. Not a question. I answered some questions. You embarrassed me in front of the Harborview people. I looked out the window at the highway and the dark fields beyond it. Did I? Claire. I have a relationship with those investors. I have been cultivating those relationships for years. And you come in and told them the truth about the project. You made it sound like you did everything. Like I just... Are you having an affair with Vanessa? The car was quiet for a long time. That's not... Are you? He exhaled through his nose. His hands shifted on the wheel. It's complicated. How long? Another silence. Longer. About a year and a half. I thought about that. A year and a half. I thought about the nights he'd stayed late, the weekend site visits, the conferences that seemed to multiply. I thought about the way he'd started asking me to stay home for events I would normally have attended, saying it was boring, saying there was nothing for me there. I thought about table 19. I got out of the car without saying anything else. Our daughter's light was still on upstairs. She was 15, a serious girl who read too much and laughed at things that were genuinely funny rather than just politely funny. She'd noticed things, I think. Kids that age always do, even when they don't say so. I went to my study and I opened my laptop. The licensing agreement between Bennett IP Holdings Incorporated and Alderton Development Group Incorporated was in a folder I hadn't opened in 3 years because there'd been no reason to. I found Section 9. Termination Provisions. I read the clause I had written 8 years ago, standing in my sister's kitchen, because she had told me to protect myself and I had listened. I began typing. I finished the letter at 4 in the morning. It was addressed to Alderton Development Group's registered agent, with copies to the board of directors, the general counsel, and the primary investors. 60 days written notice of termination of all licensing rights, pursuant to Section 9, subsection C. Licensor's determination that continuation is no longer in licensor's best interest. Without the license, Alderton couldn't use a single proprietary system or methodology on any active or future project. The Harborview-backed mixed-use development currently in the planning phase, the one that had financing contingent on the same LEED certification process that my waterfront management system had made possible the first time, would stall. The investors would ask questions. The lenders would ask questions. I sent it by registered mail and by email. Then I booked 2 rooms at a hotel in Burlington for the week, for myself and my daughter. I woke her at 7. We're going somewhere for a few days, I said. She looked at me with her clear, careful eyes. She'd always been able to read a room. Is it Dad? I'll explain in the car. Pack for a week. She nodded like she'd been half expecting this. Is he okay? He's fine. We're fine. Things are just going to change for a bit. She packed in 15 minutes. She didn't ask any more questions until we were on the QEW heading west, the lake flat and gray on our left, and then she said, "Did you do something to his company?" What makes you say that? She shrugged. You were in your office until really late. You had that look. What look? The one where you've decided something. My husband was still asleep when we left. I put the separation agreement on the kitchen counter. My sister had been holding it for 6 months. I'd had it prepared in September, when I found the texts, and I'd spent the next 6 months waiting for a moment that felt right. I understood now that there was no right moment. You just had to pick one. By the time we checked into the hotel in Burlington, my phone had 29 missed calls. I turned it off. My sister arrived that evening with takeout from a Thai place she liked, and we sat in the hotel room while my daughter watched something on her laptop with headphones on, and I told my sister everything. You actually sent the notice, she said. This morning. She looked at me for a long time. How do you feel? Tired, I said. Mostly tired. She put her arm around me. We sat there for a while. Outside, Burlington looked the way it always did in February, patient and cold and slightly gray, and somehow fine with all of that. I turned my phone back on the next morning. The notifications came in a wave. Voicemails from my husband, escalating in tone from confused to angry to something that was trying to sound calm but wasn't. A voicemail from Alderton's general counsel, formal and careful. A text from the Harborview Capital contact I'd spoken to at the gala, just 3 words, please call me. And one message from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. It was from a woman named Dr. Patricia OCI. The name stopped me. I knew that name. She was the founder and CEO of Groundline Engineering Group, one of the most respected structural engineering firms in the country, based in Vancouver. She'd been on the cover of Canadian Architect 2 years ago. She held 7 patents and had pioneered a sustainable foundation approach that was being used on infrastructure projects across British Columbia and Alberta. Miss Bennett, I don't know if we've met formally, but I've followed your work on the Lakeview Commons project with great interest, specifically the integrated stormwater management system. I believe we may have a great deal to discuss. I'm in Toronto this week. Could you find time for coffee? I read it twice. I called David Park first. I've been waiting for your call, he said. Alderton's legal team reached out to my office this morning. They're calling it tortious interference, and they're threatening breach of fiduciary duty claims based on the marital relationship. Can they make that stick? No. Your holding company is a separate legal entity. The IP is clearly in your name. The licensing agreement is airtight, because you wrote it. They'll make a lot of noise, but they don't have a real case. What do I want? He paused. You tell me. I told him. 35% equity in Alderton Development Group transferred to Bennett IP Holdings. Full ownership of all future IP developed under any project using my methodologies. A formal credit acknowledgement to be published on the company's website and included in all future award submissions and grant applications. And a seat on the advisory board. He'll say no. Let him say no to his investors while the LEED certification on his flagship project is in question and the Harborview deal is on hold. David was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. I'll send the proposed terms. The story broke 4 days later. A real estate industry newsletter picked it up first. Then the Globe and Mail ran a piece under the headline IP dispute threatens award-winning Mississauga development as co-founder's wife revokes design license. By the end of the week it was on CBC and in the Toronto Star. My husband's lawyers sent a cease and desist. I forwarded it to David with one line noted, Dr. Ose and I had coffee at a place on King West, the kind of quiet independent cafe that had somehow survived in that neighborhood long enough to become an institution. She was small and direct, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the relaxed confidence of someone who had been the smartest person in many rooms and had learned not to make a performance of it. I've been watching how you've handled this week, she said. And before this week, I'd been watching the Lakeview work. The stormwater integration is genuinely novel. The passive load approach on the community center is something I've been trying to solve a version of for 2 years. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I want to offer you a position. I looked at her, principal engineer, with a focus on sustainable infrastructure systems and IP strategy, our Vancouver office. But with significant flexibility, we do a lot of remote collaboration. Starting salary is $240,000, plus profit sharing and an equity path at 18 months. She slid a folder across the table. We've been trying to build the capacity to pursue CMHC-backed affordable housing projects, and the certification requirements align almost exactly with the systems you've already developed. You'd be coming in to lead that program. I opened the folder. The offer letter was on ground line letterhead. I'm in the middle of a fairly complicated situation, I said. I know. I read the Globe piece. She smiled slightly. I have a feeling you can manage complicated situations. Can I have a week to think? Take 2. She stood, pulling on her coat. One more thing, Miss Bennett. Don't let anyone spend another decade treating your work like a footnote. You're too good for that. The board meeting was held 3 weeks later. Alderton's investors had requested an emergency session, and David had negotiated my attendance as the representative of Bennett IP Holdings. My husband had objected. The investors had overruled him. Without the IP license, the Harborview deal was frozen and the company's active project in Brampton was operating on borrowed legal time. They needed to hear my terms directly. I wore a charcoal blazer I'd bought with my own money when I still had a salary. I'd had it dry cleaned the day before. It fit exactly right. The Alderton offices were in a glass tower in downtown Mississauga. I'd been there twice, once for the grand opening, when my husband forgot to introduce me to the city councilor standing 2 feet away from me, and once to drop off engineering documents that couldn't wait for courier. The receptionist at the front desk didn't quite manage to hide her surprise when I walked in and said who I was. The boardroom was on the 14th floor, with a view of the city and, on a clear day, the lake. There were 6 people around the table, 2 board members, 2 representatives from Harborview Capital, my husband, and Vanessa, which I had not expected. Alderton's general counsel sat at the side. My husband stood when I entered, which I think was meant to signal something, though I wasn't sure what. Claire, I know what this is, I said, and sat down. The senior Harborview partner, a woman named Margot Thiessen, ran the meeting with the clean efficiency of someone who had no patience for anything that wasn't directly relevant to recovering her firm's $40 million investment. Miss Bennett, she said. We've reviewed your termination notice and your proposed settlement terms. We'd like to understand your position. My position is straightforward, I said. Bennett IP Holdings owns the structural and mechanical design IP underlying every Alderton project completed in the last 8 years. I've chosen to terminate the licensing agreement. My proposed terms are the conditions under which I would be willing to enter a new one. This is blackmail, my husband said. It's a business negotiation, I said. Those are different things. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Claire, I understand you're upset. What happened between Marcus and I know it's hurt you. But punishing the entire company, all the people who work here. Miss Lau, I said. I don't know you. What I know is that this company has been operating for 8 years using systems and methodologies that I developed, and in that time my contribution has been very publicly as support, as a creative outlet, and most recently as something I did back in the day. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply attaching an appropriate price to my work. Silence. Margot Thiessen was watching me with the same focused attention she'd had during due diligence, I imagined. The 35% equity, she said. Walk me through the rationale. I did. I had the numbers, the comparable valuations, the documentation of every hour I had worked and every system I had developed. I had it all in the folder in front of me because I had always kept records, because my sister had told me to, and because I had understood, even 8 years ago, that this day might come. When I finished, there was a long pause. We need to discuss this privately, Margot said. Miss Bennett, would you give us a few minutes? I waited in the hallway for 25 minutes. Through the glass I could see my husband talking, his hands moving, his face red. Vanessa sat beside him. She looked much smaller than she had in the lobby of the Fairmont. The general counsel opened the door. We'd like to make a counter-proposal. I went back inside. 30% equity, Margot said. A formal IP credit clause in all future materials. The board seat, which would carry the title of Chief Structural Innovation Officer. Compensation at a director level, starting immediately. I looked at my husband. He was looking at the table. 30% is acceptable, I said, with one condition. Margot waited. Miss Lau's employment is terminated, effective immediately, with cause. No severance. The relationship with the CEO constitutes a clear conflict of interest and a violation of the company's own conduct policy, which I believe exists because I helped draft it 5 years ago. Vanessa's head came up. My husband said nothing. Margot said quietly. We need your answer. He looked at Vanessa. Something passed between them. Then he looked away. Fine, he said. We signed the settlement agreement that afternoon. It was witnessed by the General Counsel and filed before 5 o'clock. I was now the third largest shareholder in Alderton Development Group, with a board seat, a formal title, and a credit acknowledgement that would run in every award submission and publication going forward. The acknowledgement read, the structural and mechanical design systems underlying Alderton's residential and mixed-use portfolio were developed by Claire Bennett P.Eng, principal of Bennett IP Holdings Incorporated, whose proprietary methodologies form the foundation of the company's LEED certification capacity. It wasn't everything. But it was true, and it was in writing, and that was something. That night I took my daughter for dinner at her favorite sushi place on Lakeshore. She ate edamame and told me about a presentation she'd given in her engineering tech class. She wanted to study civil engineering at Waterloo or U of T. She'd been thinking about it for 2 years, she said, and hadn't mentioned it because she wasn't sure what I'd think. Why wouldn't you tell me? I asked. She shrugged, picking at her rice. I didn't know if you'd think it was a good idea. Like, if it was worth it. You have a degree and you spent years doing Dad's stuff and he never even. She stopped. It's worth it, I said. She nodded. Are you okay? Getting there. Are you going to take the job in Vancouver? I hadn't told her about Dr. Osei's offer. I looked at my daughter, at her careful, serious face, at the way she was watching me like the answer mattered. I'm thinking about it, I said. You should, she said simply. You're really good at what you do, Mom. You've always been good at it. Dad just made it seem like you weren't. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, a February wind was pushing snow sideways past the restaurant window, the kind of Canadian winter scene that should have felt bleak but somehow didn't. How did you know? I said. About your father and Vanessa. She gave me a look that was very precisely 15. Mom, I've had a phone for 3 years. His Instagram location didn't match where he said he was like 6 times. Also, she commented a heart on his LinkedIn post about the Lakeview project, and that's just embarrassing. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. I was waiting for you to figure it out, she said. Or to do something about it. I didn't know what you were going to do, though. The patent license thing was. I didn't see that coming. Neither did he. She grinned. It was her real grin, the unself-conscious one. Good. 3 months later, I accepted Dr. Osei's offer at Groundline Engineering Group. My daughter and I moved to a rented house in East Vancouver with a small yard and a view of the mountains on clear days, which happened more often than I'd expected. She enrolled in grade 11 at a school 15 minutes away and joined the robotics team within 2 weeks. 8 months after the board meeting, the Ontario Professional Engineers Association asked me to speak at their annual conference on proprietary IP development in the structural engineering field. I stood on a stage in front of 400 people and talked about my work under my own name, as myself, and it felt like something I'd been practicing for a very long time and had finally gotten right. A year after the settlement, Alderton Development Group submitted the Lakeview Commons project for a Governor General's Medal in Architecture. The submission listed me by name in the engineering credits. My husband called to tell me it had been shortlisted. I thanked him and wished him luck. We had learned, in the way that people sometimes do after everything falls apart, to be decent to each other, at least on the phone. At least for short calls. My daughter got into Waterloo Engineering. She called me from school, shouting, and I cried in my car in a parking garage in downtown Vancouver for about 10 minutes and then drove home to celebrate with her. 2 years after the settlement, Alderton went through a partial acquisition by a larger development group. My 30% stake became liquid. The number was significant enough that my sister, who handled the legal side, called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, very carefully, Claire, are you sitting down? I established the Bennett Foundation for Women in Engineering with the first tranche of the proceeds. The initial grants went to bursaries for women in undergraduate engineering programs at Canadian universities, with a priority for first-generation students. The second grant went to a legal aid fund that helped professional women document and protect IP developed during career interruptions. The third went to a mentorship network I set up with Dr. Osei, connecting established women engineers with those just starting out. My daughter called it the Don't Let Them Take Your Patents Fund, which I thought was a reasonably accurate summary. I ran into Vanessa at a conference in Calgary the following spring, a sustainable building summit that had attracted most of the major players in Canadian development. She was consulting now for a mid-sized firm, doing well by the look of things. She saw me across the atrium and for a moment I thought she'd walk the other way. She didn't. Claire, she said. Vanessa. We stood there for a moment in the way you stand with someone when you share a history that doesn't have a clean shape. I owe you an apology, she said, which I hadn't expected. I waited. I believed what he told me about you. That you checked out. That you didn't understand what he was building. She paused. I should have asked you directly. I didn't, because it was more convenient not to. He's with the new VP of marketing now, I said. Did you know that? She laughed, a short and slightly painful sound. I heard. She's 28. Good luck to her. She looked at me evenly. The work you've been doing at Groundline, the CMHC housing project. I read the methodology paper. It's extraordinary. Thank you. It was always extraordinary, she said. I just didn't look. We shook hands and went our separate ways, and I don't think I'll see her again, but I don't carry anything heavy from that conversation. Just the fact of it, which was its own kind of resolution. 5 years after the night of the Urban Development Institute Awards, I stood in my office at the Groundline Vancouver headquarters, a corner office with a west-facing window and a wall covered in framed engineering registrations, all with my name on them, Claire Bennett, P.N. And I looked out at the mountains in the fading afternoon light and tried to think about what the last 5 years had actually meant. My daughter was in her 3rd year at Waterloo. She called every Sunday and texted constantly and had recently started asking technical questions about foundation design that I found genuinely difficult to answer, which I considered a good sign. My sister visited twice a year and stayed too long, and I was always glad of both things. Dr. Osei had become a mentor and, more recently, a friend. My husband had stepped back from the CEO role at Alderton. The press release said it was by choice. Margot Thiessen told me, with the dry clarity I'd come to appreciate in her, that the board had run out of patience. None of that was what I thought about, standing at my window. What I thought about was a table in the lobby of the Fairmont Royal York, in February, when I'd been standing on cold marble telling a woman who had dismissed everything I'd built that I was a patent attorney, that I was an engineer, that my work was real and mine and mattered, and she had looked at me and said how sweet, and walked away. I had been so angry, standing there. Angry in the specific way you get when the thing that is happening to you is completely clear and there is no one in the room who is going to say so out loud. I'd been carrying some version of that anger for years, probably. Waiting. It turned out waiting had been useful. It had given me time to read the clause I'd written and know exactly what it said. It had given me time to understand exactly what I owned. My assistant knocked on the open door. You've got the Burnaby Housing Consortium call in 5 minutes. Thanks, I said. I'll be right there. I turned away from the window and sat down at my desk. There were engineering drawings spread across it, and notes from a methodology review and a photo my daughter had sent me of her most recent structural mechanics project, which she'd photographed next to a coffee cup for scale in the particular way that engineers do. I picked up the phone. I had work to do,